Hashtag missing DC girls. I thought that this was a really important subject for us to talk about, especially because there's been some misinformation surrounding it, right? There's been a number of memes that have been proven to be inaccurate, but this is still a serious issue when you uncover a lot of the layers. So we're not gonna have all the time that I would love to discuss, but first of all, according to Refinery 21, lawmakers are calling for the authorities to investigate whether there's an increase in the number of Black and Latinx, which is Latino or Latina teenagers that are disappearing in the DC metro area. Now, since then, we've all heard that 501, you may have seen different memes, you may have seen different posts about 501 missing DC teenagers, right? Predominantly, you've seen it mainly being teenage girls, Black teenage girls. Now, according to the AP, most of those cases were solved, and a lot of people didn't know that. Now, there still is 22 of the cases remain unsolved as of March 22nd. 22 cases, okay? That's still a lot of cases, a lot of open cases of missing girls. And when I say girls in this specific incident, it is, but the teenagers, there's been a lot of young boys that have been missing too. So we want to make sure that we give credence to that as well. Now, in the period of less than 2 weeks, according to Refinery 29, 10 Black and Latina teenagers have disappeared in the Washington, D.C. area, okay? And currently, 2 13-year-olds, Shia Enoch, Ania McNeil, 5 15-year-olds, Juliana Otero, Jacqueline Lacey, Dashawn Turkia Wallace, Diana White, and Morgan Richardson, 1 16-year-old, Talisha Coles, they're all still missing. Maybe you know those names. Maybe you're from the DC area, I don't know, but if you know anything about that, please call your local DC Police Department. We can include a phone number, we can include a link. And what's, I think, a more important conversation to have here, because it is pretty prevalent, the sex trafficking in DC, as well as many different hubs in the United States and of course all around the world. But so there's a fear that some of these teenagers, whether they were runaways, because many of them are, it's been pointed out by the local DC departments, the police departments, that these were runaways, they left voluntarily, but that still leaves these runaways open to either being, these are teenagers, to being enticed into prostitution, which is child sex trafficking, or being forced into it. And there's been so many cases, if you just do your digging, there's been so many cases in the DC area where they've caught pimps. There's a lot that need to be caught, that have caught these pimps, that, and you'll learn their methods, where how they entice and then force these 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls and boys into prostitution. And then they have these sex trafficking rings, and they would even transport some of them over state lines and some over international lines. Very scary stuff. So that's why it's very important. But also there's another layer too. So according to Sharice Crawford, she's a member of an advisory neighborhood commission in Southeast Washington, and she's been a big advocate into finding where these missing girls are. She's told the Washington Post, quote, residents are very worried. They're wondering if the city is taking this seriously. They say things like, quote, if white girls were disappearing uptown, there would be a state of emergency. Refinery 29 backs her up, and they say, quote, she makes a legitimate point. Cases in which young, attractive white women from middle or upper class households go missing tend to get much more media attention than instances where women of color disappear, especially if they are from low income families. The late PBS reporter Gwen Ifill coined the term missing white woman syndrome to describe this phenomenon. So there's so many different layers here. I know a lot of people, when they first saw the hashtag, they were just immediately tweeting out that 500 girls are missing and where are they? And it's not that number. And they weren't all abducted. A lot of people thought that they were abducted, when in reality, like the most recent cases, they had left voluntarily. But again, to reiterate, just because someone is a runaway doesn't mean that they should be open to being enticed into, they're 13, 14 years old.
It's still a problem, whether they left involuntarily or they didn't.
Yes.
And sometimes they're repeat offenders, or they subsequently return home after they leave. So there's a lot of misinformation surrounding the cases you accurately pointed out. However, what I wanted to talk about in regards to this issue is, yeah, they're right. If there was an outpouring, I mean, look, I want to further talk about the misinformation again before we get to the actual bare bones of the case. One of the things is, I mean, I feel like this hurts the cause. I mean, it's good because it drew national attention to the DC area. But the reality is, however terrible it is, the rate of missing persons have actually decreased according to the Metro. Yeah, according to DC police, or at least initially that's what their statement was. And it's terrifying that this is a decreasing number and yet there's still so many. What also upset me about the hypocrisy of the situation is that the FBI could find Tom Brady's jersey in Mexico. They track it down and they find it because that jersey is worth millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And then in the eyes of the government, or whether it's the federal authorities, whether it's local authorities, these girls are not worth that much.
To them.
Therefore, to them.
Yep.
And that's the reason why they won't put all of their resources behind it. And that's the reason why they can hide behind facts like, oh, well, they're subsequent offenders, or they usually return home after leaving home on their own. It's not a kidnapping. It doesn't need to be a kidnapping. We need to find what the problem is and address it, and then try to fix it if they're leaving.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what you're saying, Haas, and I found a lot of misinformation surrounding this story, so it was hard to figure out exactly where the truth was. And the truth is,
those memes were circulating,
right? Because the memes were circulating,
and they were inaccurate.
They were being retweeted by like politicians. They were being
celebrities.
By celebrities, and so unfortunately,
it comes from a good place.
That. It comes from a good place, absolutely. But you see that, and a lot of people just take that as like that word is true, like that tweet is true, and therefore it's completely accurate. The sources that helped me get to the bottom of what was going on was actually the BBC, and I find that with stories like this, unfortunately, with the partisan rhetoric that exists within so many of the big media conglomerates, going to an international source and having it sorted out there is a little bit easier to dissect exactly what's going on here. I went to the BBC and they said that the story, the meme that was being circulated that 14 girls have gone missing is inaccurate. However, just like you were saying in the intro, Sam, there is, Black and Latinx persons do go missing at a disproportionate rate and are underreported than white teenagers, and that is what we should be talking about. And we should be talking about what happens when they do go missing. Like, what is this a symptom of? Like, what's going on here? But when there is a spread of misinformation, it undercuts that message, and that's what the problem is when you go back and check your sources and check sources that maybe you don't typically go to. I really think that, especially with national news, it's so hard to filter through exactly where the truth lies. So international news outlets reporting on what's going on in our nation have been very helpful to me because they have no stake in this. It's as objective as it can come. They're not based
except
in the
for
DC.
Daily Mail, which is which involves itself in partisan hackery almost as consistently as Fox News. I don't know why. Well, maybe it's because it drives shares. We know that conservative blogs or conservative messaging drives a lot more shares on the internet than liberal ones, unfortunately. So that's probably why. But you bring up a really good point. Although when it comes to their own domestic matters, even outlets like Russia Today, aside from things that involve Russia, which they are known to promote propaganda when it is about Russia, when it comes to international matters or American matters, they're quite objective, including Al Jazeera.
Amir, what did you when you saw the hashtag and then when you started to do some digging, because then Amir, you sent me some additional articles that kind of broke down what's true, what's not, which was great. That was at NBCWashington.com. How did you, and then you look at the underlying layer of just sex trafficking in general. It's tough because you do want to make sure that you're getting all, I think, Grace, you hit the nail on the head. You do want to make sure that you're getting all your details and you're promoting those very scary statistics the right way, because if you overshoot it and then it comes back that wasn't true, then all of a sudden no one cares anymore.
All the credibility is gone.
All the credibility is gone, and that's what's scary.
What you were saying, Grace, and it's super important. Like there's a mindset now that because some of these girls left voluntarily, that means like we shouldn't care about this.
I know,
but they're leaving their homes and they're running away. That's a problem that we need to talk about and we need to deal with. And like besides just the trafficking,
yeah, they feel like there's no alternative.
Right, and why
is it so bad that they feel the need that they have to leave?
Right, and when you have predominantly Latino and Latina and Black teenagers that are being reported missing and then not found. Some of these are still open cold cases. You do have to compare that. You did say, it is, and it says in the article too, it is disproportionate to the white teenagers and the media attention too. If there were 22 white teenagers that were cold cases in Los Angeles right now, that would be largely covered. And I'm sure in DC, I mean, it is talked about in the article that in some of these local news outlets, they do cover it. It's the national media news outlet that have the missing white person syndrome,
missing
right?
white woman syndrome.
Yeah, so it's definitely an issue. It's a very serious issue, and it needs more attention. And I think at the end of the day, they need to find out why is there so many runaways too.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like what the Washington D.C. PD kind of said. Like, yeah, we have an issue with runaways, and some of those runaways will return home, as you stated, Haas. Some of those runaways will end up, making it on the streets somehow. They might fend for themselves or find a way to support themselves, while others may fall into becoming a victim of sex trafficking. Whether they think at 13, 14 that they're making that choice, they're not. Okay, they're being enticed and they are being forced. And some of them are straight up being abducted and forced. And that's fucking scary. And it's a big problem here in America. We think it's not a US problem. It's a big problem in Long Beach.
Yeah.
It's a big problem in Miami. It's a big problem in a lot of different areas. But those hubs like Long Beach, Miami, and DC, and we talked about during the Super Bowl, it becomes
huge.
like
Every year, I think for the
living,
past
breathing
5 years
beast.
at least, we've been reading stories about huge FBI stings around Super Bowl. They
fucking
plan on
scary.
it because that's when a lot of the trafficking happens.
It's so scary, and the most vulnerable, the disenfranchised, and the ones that are running away that need help are the ones that are being preyed upon.
And right now, we're really talking about American citizens who are being trafficked. There's still thousands of people that are not Americans that are brought here from like South America, from Mexico, from across the sea, and they're just brought here. We don't even know about them. They don't even have
Asia,
They don't have families here. They're pulled from their families out of here.
And a lot of the times too, within some of the stories that I've read, either they're pulled from their families or their families have 5 or 6 kids and they actually sell their child into sex slavery because in their mind, they think that's the better option or the better choice to support maybe some of the other members of the family. It's very sad. So then you have these nonprofit organizations who are set to intervene before that mom and dad makes that choice, because in their eyes, they don't want to make that choice. Maybe some of them selfishly are shitty parents and they make that choice for their own selfishness, but a lot of the times they feel like that's the only thing they can do to support maybe the rest of their family. So these nonprofits will come in and they'll intervene in time where they can support that family so they don't have to make that choice. It's a very big industry. It's a $1 billion industry, and it's so gross to even say that out loud when you're profiting off of the sale of children and sex. So I think at the end of the day, this hashtag did bring a lot of attention, but let's just remember to check our sources. Let's remember to make sure that when you retweet something, and I've been guilty of that too in the past, when you retweet something, to really make sure that it's legitimate instead of just getting on that bandwagon, which I get. You're emotional. You think, oh my God, where are all these DC girls? And you want to be a part of that and try and get that word out, but at the same time, you don't want to undercut it, as you said. So please keep the conversation going, and who knows, if you know any of those names, if there's anything that you wanna, that you maybe you're in an area and you know something, or you're aware of something, or you've been approached.
If you see something, say something.
See something, say something, and please let's make sure that we include some different links to help support that. So keep the conversation going, and we'll see you next time on Pop Trigger.